And hundreds of people gathered near air base in the southern Turkish province of Adana on Sunday to voice their opposition to the military presence of the US-led North Atlantic Treaty Organization. About hundreds of meters away from the base, protesters were chanting slogans, holding banners reading, "Get out, NATO, this land is ours." Some protesters believe that NATO being a military alliance has led to massive numbers of bloodshed in the neighboring areas. Since Turkey joined the military alliance in 1952, voices calling for its withdrawal and shutdown of the military bases have never ceased in the country. The United States, which now uses the air base in Sirlik, along with Turkey, claims the troops were stationed to protect the south wing of NATO. However, reports have revealed that in the airbase stores tactical nuclear weapons, and protesters were worried that consequences caused by such weapons would eventually befall the Turkish people.
We are here to protest the NATO quarters in Incirlik. We're saying that it is the source of every manipulation, every vicious attack that has been done to the Turkish people and the surrounding countries. And they do not belong to it. Their manipulative interruptions are not welcome, and they are sick. We will not stop until they are banished from our lands.
Well, joining us to talk more about the situation in Ukraine is a security expert who joins us from Kent, Mr. Temitope Olodo. Always a pleasure having you join us on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's begin with Sweden, the governing party dropping its long opposition to, the country joining NATO. Were you surprised?
Not at all. With the ongoing drama between Ukraine and Russia, anyone, particularly in that region, will more or less will have draw up the conclusion that it's just a matter of time for Sweden and Finland to actually try and seek the support of NATO. With the population changing their mindset, we now have about 75% of the people in those countries literally saying, we think joining NATO is a good idea. That was not the case, before the Ukraine and Russia crisis. And I think that is the reason why we're seeing a change in policy from the government, or two governments who were initially, believed in non-alliance, neutrality, and now actually looking at, joining forces with NATO.
Interesting that you should say that, because in terms of the polls, I think for Sweden it's about half of the population, while for Finland 75% in support. But then the former Prime Minister to Sweden said that Sweden stopped being neutral when it joined the European Union in 1995. But then it's also a different thing for Finland, which is strongly moving ahead with that intention. But Putin has called it a mistake. Even though the Finnish president said that the call he had with Putin over the weekend did not contain any threats. But what do you think could be going through President Putin's mind?
I think considering that they share a 1,300-kilometer border with Russia, that more or less is where the red line starts. This was a miscalculation by, of course, Putin, because he wasn't expecting that this will snowball into this situation where you have two countries who were neutral before. Of course, they were sharing intelligence and exercises with NATO, but never would have thought, not in our lifetime, that it will have gotten to this situation. But here we are now where, these two countries are now contemplating, but not only contemplating, are rushing to pick up their ticket, like the Nigerian politicians are picking up their nomination ticket, to join the race to become part of NATO, which initially started with just 12 members, back in the early 40s. So I think we're seeing a serious issue here. And the way things are going, even many of us analysts are sitting close to our TV set and listening to different news to find out exactly how this, game would play out, because only God could tell what is going to happen next.
And we're seeing, several protests in Turkey, and Turkey, seeming to would definitely have a key role to play, the deciding factor in their applications to NATO. Yeah. But what do you think are some of its reservations, and is it seeking leverage, even though it is said that that is not the case?
I think NATO has made it clear that they would take into consideration any serious concerns that Turkey has, and Turkey is talking from the fact that there is this issue about alliance support for support that they might have, Finland might have for a terrorist group, that and that is where they are coming from. Of course, both parties, Finland will of course disagree with that, to say no, that is not the case. I think there will be an amicable way of resolving this issue. But let's not kid ourselves. This war that started over 80 days ago was not just Ukraine fighting Russia. It was the West fighting Russia, because it's the West weaponry that is slowing down Russians' advancement within the territory of Ukraine. But not only slowing it down, but they are losing a lot of, in fact, they said that over 30% of the troops that have been committed, or weaponry that have been committed to this war, have been lost. So it's a huge loss, to Russia, and Russia needs to save face. How would they save face? Would they go nuclear? Would they intensify? What would they do? Most of us are just guessing what they will do, but we know the war is being fought both in the south, both in the east, and there's a lot of destruction that is going on as we speak.
It's also interesting that you should say that, meaning that you agree with what Putin said during his Victory Day speech, saying, this is sort of, between the West and against Russia. And we also heard recently from the EU ambassador, Russia's ambassador to the EU, who said that, the West was really pumping all sorts of weapons. When he was asked the question, when will this war end? So it's almost as if he wants the West to stop pumping weapons to Ukraine, yet it wants to take control of Donbass and, and several other lists that it has, put out there. But do you think that, and this is with NATO, do you think that NATO has is helping as much Ukraine as it should? It's given that kind of reassurance even to the other 27 EU countries in this kind of situation?
It's quite interesting that you're saying this. I think one of the things that have stopped NATO's full intervention in this situation is because Ukraine is not a member of NATO. We all know that. But they've given enough support in terms of giving weapons to them and saying, go ahead, go and do the fight yourself. But many that are members of NATO now will be asking themselves, how will NATO really defend us if this issue really comes down to the fact that Russia invades or attacks a NATO alliance country? Because we're talking of 30 strong members of NATO, and Finland and Sweden joining them now will make them 32. They will love that. But the question is, how much defense could they give? Both groups, both Russia and NATO, are using Ukraine as a playing field where they are actually seeing how testing each other's capability and each other's skill set, to be able to confront each other. And I think Britain, for example, you could see it actually playing out. Now, both Sweden and Finland are now getting advice and support, because what happened initially when Ukraine was asking for support, the NATO countries were a bit slow, but you could see UK now signing contracts, with Sweden and the others to say we're going to enter. So they are preempting and putting in place measures in case Russia decides to go rogue and attack those two countries. So we're seeing a lot of changes in the way the game, or the war chess game, is being played. So everything is changing, and this is because of what is happening currently in Ukraine.
We'll continue to watch the developments from there. We always appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Mr. Temitope Olode, for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.